To set the scene today, I was reading this morning some words from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on July 18th, and he said, the pandemic has revealed, like an X-ray, fractures in the fragile skeleton of the societies we have built. It is exposing fallacies and falsehoods everywhere. The lie that free markets can deliver healthcare for all, the fiction that unpaid care work is not work, the delusion that we live in a post-racist world, the myth that we are all in the same boat. He said, because while we are all floating at sea, it's clear that some are in super yachts while others are clinging to the floating debris. He said the coronavirus pandemic has created a generational opportunity to build a more equal and sustainable world. Hence the title of this town hall, What's Next? Building Forward, Better and Accelerating Progress. We have the great pleasure to be in conversation today with two great friends and colleagues who are formidable independently and together make a great team. Let me introduce, first of all, Ms. Amal Abou Rafeh. And you'll see in the chat box that Andra has put the full bio, or a very brief of the full bio. Amal is Chief of the Program on Aging at the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs in New York. She serves on the Secretariat of the General Assembly's Working Group for the purpose of strengthening the protection of the human rights of older persons, and is a member of the Steering Committee of the Titchfield City Group on Aging-related Statistics and Age Disaggregated Data. Amal is formidable. She's a formidable advocate, friend. She stands alongside and with civil society. She has these unbelievable persuasive talents that you almost, think that you start off by thinking you're not going to do what she's asked, and all of a sudden you're doing it. She works across the UN agencies and has been a remarkable colleague and friend for civil society, for the good of older people. So we welcome Amal, thank you. And then Rio Hada. Rio is currently coordinating the work of the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in the area of economic and social rights. He also leads the work of OCHA on the human rights of older persons and serves as the Joint Secretariat with DESA for the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, established by the General Assembly with a mandate to strengthen the protection of human rights of older persons. As I said, we are in for a rare conversation with Amal and Rio. And rather than asking each of them to just make statements, we're really going to ask them some questions, because it's really the questions that provide some answers. So with your permission, I'm going to start off by asking Amal. Amal, welcome. Looking back, how did COVID-19 really impact the work of the UN system?
Yeah, hi, thank you, Jane, and good morning, everyone. And thank you for this really good question. And before I answer, I just want to say that we're really grateful to you and to your team for holding these webinars that's keeping everyone engaged. And I really like the format today of us having a conversation, and I would appreciate if you send all your tough questions to Rio. But, what's interesting about this question is I think it's a good time now to take a moment and just pause for a second and think about how this all started, how the COVID impacted the work on the UN system. And I did some homework because we're sort of posting online a list of what the UN has done on COVID-19. And I realized that the first thing that came out of the UN system was on March 18, and it was by the WHO Department of Mental Health and Substance Use. They issued 7 days after WHO declared COVID to be a pandemic, sort of a message on mental health and psychological considerations during the pandemic. And they had a section dedicated to older people, you know, talking about real simple things, how to share the facts with older people, how to give them information about how to reduce the risk of themselves getting the infection, and even how to help them practice prevention measures. And then later, on the 21st of March, WHO issued a interim guidance on infection prevention and control limited to long-term care facilities. And on the same day, our colleagues at UNHCR who deal with refugees issued a guidance to support their teams in the field on age, gender, and diversity considerations. And although this covered many social groups, they did highlight that older people in particular are the ones with underlying health problems and are at more risk of becoming seriously unwell. They did highlight that older people are likely to have ongoing health needs that require medical assistance. They made reference to older people could often be socially isolated. They made reference to restrictions on movement that may disproportionately affect them, that many of them may be particularly economically vulnerable and rely on others for their basic needs. And they had tips for mitigating risks faced by older people. Now, our colleagues at the SCAP, the UN regional arm in the Asia and Pacific region, were up next on the 26th of March. They issued a brief on the impact of COVID-19 in the region, and in it, they also noted that the older people are apparently disproportionately affected and that the death ranges were 20 to 40% at the time. It was only until the 27th of March that the independent expert made a statement on older persons. Now, although it was just a message, it was powerful. She reported on abandoned older people in care homes and how disturbing and alarming are the dead corpses that were found in these nursing homes. And I believe, and Rio can correct me, that this is the first time that her message is also collaborated and endorsed by so many other UN experts. And here we start seeing the hints of collaboration starting to take place. And then on April 6th, the UN Disaster Risk Reduction issued like an article on battling stigma and discrimination against older persons. And they did that by interviewing someone from HelpAge who was working in the field in such emergency contexts. It was only until April 9 that DESA and that we first saw the first dedicated brief on older persons. And I'm really proud of my team for working on this, specifically Julia Ferre, who led, writing this brief. And it helped, I believe, frame the discussion that was to come in the UN system. So we talked about ensuring equal access to healthcare, to strengthening social support while implementing physical distance and the age-inclusive international cooperation that is needed. And we called it a defining moment because that's what we believe the moment was. And in April, with all this work happening, the Undersecretary Generals of both DESA and OHCHR in New York met up with the Secretary General's team and discussed what could and needs to be done on older persons moving forward. So I don't know, Rio, I think I'll pass it on to you because at that point in the story makes its way to Geneva.
Thank you. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Amal. Yeah, just take a little step back. And I think for all the UN agencies, soon after the pandemic outbreak, everybody shifted their focus into COVID. So, WHO will issue guidance, and all the other agencies will do the same in their own areas of mandates. And there has been reactions from UN human rights mechanisms, special procedures, the joint statements that Amal mentioned. But I think it was this the meeting that Amal mentioned that was convened by the Office of the Secretary General, DESA, OSHR, and UNFPA that led to a more system-wide messaging, developing a policy brief to highlight the risks of older persons that faced in the pandemic, but also recognize their contributions in different roles that they play, and emphasizing the importance of putting older persons at the center of response and recovery. And this is a sort of a consistent messages that SG is bringing out in different policy briefs. These are really his initiative to highlight the impact of COVID across different sectors, across different groups, and so forcing us to come together and think together to make that the shift necessary to recover better. So at the same time, the Secretary General issued the UN socio-economic responses to the COVID pandemic. And now under the UN resident coordinators, UN country teams are really focusing on making that assessment and supporting the country efforts in bringing forward that coherent and coordinated response. So I think that so the impact of COVID is, I mean, for me, it's really an opportunity that that we are addressing the issues of older persons together, not just by OSHR on human rights, not just by DESA or UNFPA, but it's an opportunity to bring the UN system together to focus on this issue. And I think the NGOs advocacy and really by coming forward to us, offering their support, and we drew a lot on the examples and evidences and voices of older persons that you're collecting in your work to feed into this SG policy brief. I stop here.
Yeah, I just want to go back and I want you both to explain the importance. I hear that COVID has actually helped form a bridge and there's a more unified approach. I think what would be helpful is, why is it so important that the Special Rapporteur said something? Or why is it so important that the Secretary General said something, or the Director General? You know, how does it actually get from the UN and the WHO headquarters down to member states, down to the country level? Because everybody in country is jumping up and down around, where are the guidelines for long-term care? What's happening with older people in my community? So can you actually make that link for us? Why is it so important that something happens up here, and what happens at a member state level? You know, so can you just speak to that very briefly? I'm just catching up with Bill Smith's question. So could one of you just talk to that? How does it get to the country level?
Rio, can I get started with the SG, and I'll pass it on to you for bringing
Sure.
it down to the regional country level, because you've worked on that before. Jane, it's a no-brainer. This was the first time the Secretary General issues something fully dedicated to older persons. It hadn't happened before. And I invite you all to go back and watch his video message when he launched that report. He talked about himself being an older person. He talked about his mother. You know, you can tell, and to me, I continue to say that it's heartbreaking that it took a pandemic to get this kind of attention from the Secretary General. He was there before, he did talk to things, but you can tell that we won him over with this. And look at the language he uses. He referred to older people as leaders. I mean, you could see there's a change. There was a hook in there, And now the trick is, how do we make sure we don't let go, and we make sure that this trickles down to the rest of the UN system? So Rio, I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah, so I would say that, I don't know if others agree with the assessment, but I feel that the issue of older persons have received relatively little attention in the work of the UN compared to other groups like women or children or persons with disability. But I think this COVID has changed or has a potential to change the situation with the messages and statements from the SG and the UN principles. But that's also, that's not enough. And we need to bring that to the country level or vice versa. And many UN agencies are paying more attention to the issue of older persons, the resident coordinators, the work of the UN country team. I would even say that certainly for OSHR, compared to 1 year ago, we are much more focusing on looking at the impact of older persons in our field monitoring work. And that, I think, so the SG's messages and your sort of advocacy work are really pushing us to collaborate much more closely together between New York and Geneva, and between global levels and regional and country levels. And I think that's, this is a message that we're also bringing to the member states, that we are trying to strengthen the synergies, finding complementarities between different initiatives.
So I just want to go back to, we're in a pandemic. I would have naturally thought that would trigger a response at the UN. But what's been the limiting factors, Amal, for us? Is it limitation of data? Don't we have a strong voice? Does it go back to these issues that we're dealing with in getting a UN convention conversation? What is it that we could be doing as civil society?
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Let me just say that it's it's not a natural smooth flow that would happen, as some people would assume. I've had colleagues at the UN ask me, oh, does this mean that we're going to get a convention now? No, from how I see it, it has not been that smooth. It's been an uphill battle. One of the challenges, and I know this sounds like cliche, but we've experienced a lot of ageist attitudes, even within the UN system. It's sort of revealed people's approach and understanding of aging and longevity and what it is to be an older person. And a lot of this conversation popped out, and it was painful. I mean, let me tell you, I've had evenings where I would cry at night out of frustration when it came to the issues of triage, and how to use these limited medical resources and so on, until WHO stepped up and set the guideline nice and clear. So it's not, as one would assume, is a natural reaction. It takes a lot of work. Now, civil society has played a big role. Like Rio said, we really tapped into your knowledge, your information, your experience in the fields. You're bringing the voices of older persons back to us. That's why the Secretary General's brief was so well written, because you can tell anyone who would read it, whether in the UN system, in national human rights institutions, in civil society, feel that their messaging is there. That's because it was there. And I have to give credit to Rio and Peggy, because they were the pen holders, and they could have taken the easy, straightforward way out, but they didn't. They collaborated throughout the UN system and, opened up for inputs from the outside. Now, the other limitation that we have is, as you mentioned, Jane, data. I mean, we were fought, and rightfully so. I see the point of colleagues who work in statistics and population demography when we started writing about older persons, because, and I have their statement here that I keep at my desk is that empirical evidence base is very scattered. It is not representative at the national level or subnational level, and is often based on information provided by hospitals or other institutions. So how can you build on the UN messaging to what governments should do when the basis of it is not statistically, reliable? And having said that, I want to say that I was on a call with the UN Titchfield group. It's a voluntary group of national statistics offices worldwide that are working on aging-related statistics, and they're currently preparing guidelines on data collection when it comes to older persons in the context of COVID. So we hope that that will help a little bit at the national level when it comes to data.
Could I just ask you about, you might have to take your hat off. How did member states react, to the statement by the Secretary General? What was the, could you see, support? Was there, real support and action from member states?
Yeah, if I can take this, Rio, since it took place in New York. Thank you. So once that Secretary General brief and message was out, we sensed movement amongst member states in New York. And this movement was quite interesting because it was cross-regional. It wasn't your usual suspects. If you go online and look at the statement, you look at who the core group that started the statement. You'll see Canada pop up. You'll see Morocco pop up. We haven't seen them engage like this in a leadership role before. Something has changed. And civil society, since you are advocates for whatever you would be advocating for, should keep an eye on and sensitize yourselves to these movements that are happening. What changed for this to take place? And then the statement that was made to support the Secretary General's brief was signed by 146 member states. I don't want to compare social groups, but I will. That's more than the support that the Secretary General's brief had on persons with disabilities, and quite close to the support that the Secretary General had on his brief on children, I think it was. So while we're always at the bottom of the priority list of social groups, there was a flip. However, again, I invite everyone, and I've done that exercise myself, go back to that list of member states and see who's missing. Who's missing? Why are they missing? What is the reason for them not signing up? And it could be a matter of principle. It could be a matter of it's not a priority for them right now. It could be a matter of logistics. The delegate in New York never got the answer back in Capitol in time to sign off. I don't know. But it's interesting to see who has been missing and to look further into what kind of advocacy work could be done at the national level to bring to the attention of those member states why these issues matter to you.
Yeah, just a comment. I just want to acknowledge Margaret Gillis from Canada. And you mentioned Canada, signed on, ILC Canada, and Margaret Gillis, really has been tapping at the door. I wouldn't say tapping, I think that's a bit gentle, but, stomping quite heavily. So, advocacy does work. The voices of civil society do work. I'd like to actually just take a couple of questions from the floor now, if you're comfortable with that. First of all, Thelma Kay, Verity, and Ken Bluestone. So could you keep the questions quite tight so that we can get through a lot of them? So Thelma, would you like to come forward with your question? I think you might be muted, Thelma.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Hi, Amal. Hi, Rio. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see all of you. Having retired from the UN but still actively engaged in the aging scene, I feel that older persons themselves are not actively involved, both at the intergovernmental level and even in the context of Asia at the civil society level. So how would you propose that older persons themselves get more involved in this whole process? Because I see that thing.
Okay, thanks, Thelma. I'll take the other two questions and then come back to you, Amal and Rio. So Verity from Help Age International.
Thanks, Jane, and thanks, Rio and Amal. So I had a couple of questions. I'll be quick. One was just to follow up on the socioeconomic framework and the opportunities you see there, because we're trying at Help Age to provide as much guidance as possible to partners at the national level for how they can make the most of some of these opportunities at the global level. So it would be good to know if you see, if you can give any advice on the opportunities at the national level for civil society to be engaging with those processes to support the inclusion of older people. And then, as you'll both know, a number of civil society organisations recently joined forces to send a letter to the Secretary General welcoming that brief, but also highlighting some of the gaps in relation to the UN system and asking for some kind of concrete steps and a plan for how to address that going forwards. We've had a response this week, which is encouraging, to say that there'll be some recommendations made by DESA and by OHCHR. So it was just to really find out what how you see civil society being engaged in that conversation and what the next steps might look like. Thank you.
I think that you're asking Amal and Rio if they've got any inside information.
I mean, yeah.
And finally, Ken Bluestone.
Hi, thanks, Jane. I feel like we're taking things in very different directions, but let's throw this into the mix anyway. One of my frustrations around the way that data is handled and represented is the fact that because, as Amal pointed out, because that the data simply isn't there yet, it isn't being gathered, and we know that steps are being taken to improve the supply of data. When reports are presented, when the analysis is done, what you simply see is this complete absence of any kind of thinking or representation that older age groups exist. And I really feel quite passionately that what we need to make visible are the gaps in the data. So not to ignore that there are older people, especially the older old, but to actually make visible the fact that the data is simply not available, so that we have a duty, a responsibility to have something there. So I'm just curious, within the UN system, is it possible, can we create this as a little bit more standard practice that these older age categories must be represented and to show where the gaps are?
Okay, thanks, Ken. We go back to the question from Thelma about where are older people in this process? So perhaps, Rio, did you want to kick that off?
Sure. Hi, Thelma, my old mentor from my younger days. Let me take up this question of involvement of older persons, and as well as from Verity on the socioeconomic response. I think this SG policy brief is a little bit unique in a way that we really try to get those voices of older persons, and we heavily obviously we cannot go out we have this like Help Age and those voices of older person into this process, and it's the same that we are also trying to promote in this UN socioeconomic balance and assessments. And in many country teams, they are doing interviews. For example, just before this webinar, we were just sort of finalizing the socioeconomic assessment for Ukraine, where the UN Human Rights Office have conducted a series of interviews together with civil society partners, looking at the situation of care homes, interviewing the care workers and older persons. So this is really important to look at the situation from the lenses of the rights holders themselves. Having said that, looking at sort of a overall, different socioeconomic assessments, I feel that personally that many of those assessments that UN is doing right now, we are still approaching older persons from vulnerability lens. And we're not really, we're looking at the risks, we're looking at deficits, but we're not really focusing on their capability and the actions and responses needed to protect and promote their autonomy and independence. So I think in that sense, the COVID has created a lot of awareness about older persons, and we need to take this opportunity to go even further to create more knowledge and more understanding of what are the rights-based response for the COVID pandemic for the older persons. I'll stop here. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Rio. Amal, could you pick up the question about data, and also, do you have any inside information?
Yeah, thanks, Jane. On data, I think Ken is right. I mean, if the data isn't there, does it mean that we should, just stop and wait? No, we're not going to stop and wait. For us in our work, we had to, I have to say, we had to accommodate by toning down some of the claims we were making, because we wouldn't have been able to back it up by evidence, but we kept the messaging there. Now, to make it more visible, Ken, in a more practical way, let me tell you that with the UN Interagency Group on Aging, and I have given and I continue to give credit to Rio, because it was his idea to came up that we need to have a meeting. We have dozens and dozens of material that's been prepared. We really need to put it to good use within the UN system. So we reached out to a UN, entity called the UN Development Coordination Office. Their job is to coordinate the role of resident coordinators throughout the UN system. They're the central people who deal with that. Luck plays a big role in so many things in life, Jane, as you know, and it just so happens that one of their senior people used to be at UNDP and helped set up this interagency meeting. So Rosemary Kalapurathal, which many of you know, and her heart is still on the topic. So they met up and they joined the interagency group. They're our newest member. We're 19 agencies now. Now, why does it matter? Because they can help bring that message down. And it's already started. I mean, they're now working on a checklist for a human rights-based approach to the socioeconomic country responses to COVID-19. This checklist is meant to have potential actions and tools and resources for the resident coordinators in the work that they're doing on assessing their responses and recovery plan as UN entities on the ground at the country level to make sure that it's human rights based and that no one's left behind. Now, what our colleague who's with us in the interagency group from there recommended was that if we were to prepare a checklist fully dedicated to older persons, they would be more than happy to annex it into their work, their core mainstream work. And with big thanks to Julia from our end and Rio, we've actually put together a checklist on that. And in it, one of the undertakings is to map who's the most at risk at the country level, with specific questions dedicated on older persons. So Ken, although the data issue will take time with guidelines and standardization and so on and so forth and will play out, we're working on a different path through something that's more practical on the ground, and it will matter. It'll affect what the priorities are at the country level for the UN, and I'm hoping where the money goes. For Verity, if ever a civil society feel that they're working so hard and it's going nowhere and they're frustrated, please don't. This letter that the Secretary General received from you that had a little more than concrete proposals. And there were, I think, 2 letters that went to the Secretary General, from Garrett and from a joint open letter. And from our end, when the Secretary General's office forwarded this letter to us, they were open to have a discussion about it. So it wasn't your usual draft me a nice, polite reply that thank you, we acknowledge this and we'll look into it. And we did have a nice, candid conversation with them. And you can see clearly from the response that was sent back to the NGOs, and I'm going to read it. This is from the Secretary General. Moving forward, I have requested DESA and OHCHR to identify ways to further strengthen the inclusion of the older persons in the work of the United Nations systems at all levels. Now, the best inside information I can give you, Verity, is we haven't heard yet from the Secretary General's office. We actually know about this answer because you guys from civil society have shared with us. So Rio and I are waiting for our marching orders to come in, but waiting for that, but at the same time not waiting, because you can clearly see we're starting to move to make sure older people are included throughout the UN at all levels. Thank you.
Thanks, Amal. And just as another example of the power of civil society, the IFA analysed all of the WHO technical guidelines in terms of where older people were mentioned across 75 guidelines and more, thanks to Andra, and analysed them, put the analysis into infographics, sent it back to the WHO, and that actually contributed to WHO being able to actually have a single portal for information and guidelines around older people. So it's really about understanding where the gaps are and helping, the UN and WHO. We have 3 more speakers. I'd like to call on Anne-Marie Felton, Maria Fenech, and also Alanna Armitage, who would just like to make a comment. So Anne-Marie Felton, are you with us? Okay, I'll go on to Maria Fenech and then come back to you, Anne-Marie. Maria, are you with us?
Here, I'm here.
Okay.
So let me go back to my comment. So basically, where was my comment? So basically my concern is, speakers have been mentioning it as well, that at UN level, older persons are not being heard. And basically, older persons are at the risk of their own governments and their own communities. So decisions are being taken irrespective of whether older persons will get the hard end of the stick at the end. So, that is something so very concerning and frustrating back home, that communities are open, people are not wearing masks, there are mass gatherings, and COVID is starting to escalate again. And yet the older person is being told, listen, do as you please, but be careful. But how careful can an older person be when we're acting so irresponsibly? Older persons have become the risk of our communities now. They're expendable, it so seems, because they are the high-risk group. And that's even when they die here, we've had 9 deaths in Malta. When the deaths are announced, the government says, but the older person who died had other health conditions. So what? So what? Go tell that to his family or to her family. Go tell it to me. I'm very frustrated about the whole situation. I do get very passionate about it. Sorry, Ma, it's really...
Do you know, look, we never have to apologise for being passionate and emotional about these issues that you deal with on a daily basis, moment by moment. So, we welcome your passion and your commitment. So just hold there and I'll go back to Amal and Rio. I'll ask Anne-Marie's question. Anne-Marie from FEND. Would it be possible for UN WHO national representative to be more publicly present and have more frequent briefings? Otherwise, it seems very remote. I think it's this, you know, UN and WHO, what happens down here? How do we understand that process? Perhaps if you could speak to those two issues, and then we'll ask Alanna Armitage to make a comment.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. I'll grab the first question, and pass the second one to Rio, if that's okay. Maria, I hear you, you know, and now it's getting more difficult with, I sense that there's a certain numbness when we look at the numbers, especially in the US on the news. I mean, let's remember that these are people, and you know, in our experience in New York City, we were at the epicenter of it all. So there was a time when someone said that at some point, every person in New York will know someone who passed away from COVID. And I tell you that that's what happened. And one should not separate that from the work that we do. And that's why I'm sharing very openly that there was a time where I felt very frustrated about things not moving fast enough. But we shouldn't stop working on this. And I know from colleagues from WHO, and I know Alanna will be commenting next, and I'd really appreciate if she can bring it up as well, at the regional level where she's at in UNFPA, they've been working and collaborating with this emergency response. So these UN representatives that go down to the country level, visit government people from the Ministry of Health, giving them guidance notes. You know, that's really important, the engagement directly with the policymakers. And I feel like once this trickles down, these guidelines, the checklist that I'm talking about with Rio, each and every UN office at the country team will have it, and it'll shape. They have their officers that deal with data. They have their officers that deal with communication with the government. They have their connections. It'll trickle down into their messaging. But having said that the role of civil society that brings the voices of older persons is key. And that, very quickly, Jane, that taps into what Thelma had mentioned. Just to go back very quickly at the global level, you know, Thelma, at the UN, when delegations used to come, they would have youth representatives speaking. The delegate would step back and bring in a young person to come and talk about youth. Why don't we do that for older persons? Why don't older persons come as part of the delegations to the UN and speak? And now that it's virtual, even better, it's easier. And don't forget the role of regional commissions and engaging with them and finding opportunities through their events to bring in older people themselves to deliver their message over there. So I'll pass it on to Rio. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Very quickly to Anne-Marie about sort of country level voices. Certainly from our experience at the Human Rights, this is happening and this is making an impact. For example, in Serbia, our human rights team have been sort of working closely with the UN resident coordinators, UNFPA country representatives to bring the discussions with the state ministries and ombudsman to advocate for the protection of older persons. To Maria, I think what you're saying, it really echoes the many of the recommendations from the SG's policy brief. One of them is to really strengthen the accountability of all actors. And that's why the SG policy brief talks about the need to strengthen legal framework at national and international levels. And to have that human rights accountability framework, it also calls on the working group on aging to accelerate its work towards developing a convention. I'll stop here.
Okay,
Jane.
thank you. Alanna Armitage, would you just like to make a few comments?
Sure. Thank you so much, Jane, and greetings to everyone. I see many friends online. Happy to see you all. Thank you, Jane, for this series, because it's been so important for us in the UN system. Although you don't always see us, we are here and we are taking part in this series and learning so much every time. Because I don't know who's online from the UN at country level, I just wanted to take the floor briefly. My name is Alanna Armitage. I'm the Regional Director for the United Nations Population Fund based in Istanbul for Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And I did want to just reassure that although action is insufficient, there is quite a bit of action ongoing at the country level at the UN, within the UN country teams, and particularly together with civil society, whether it's HelpAge, the International Federation of the Red Cross. There's a lot of emergency work ongoing right now. I can only speak for UNFPA, who works very closely in collaboration with the other UN agencies under the leadership of WHO and the resident coordinator. But we very quickly issued our own guidance to our country reps, basically, making a call for them to urgently prioritize the rights, health, and needs, protection needs of older people. And in our region, we quickly held a webinar with all the resident coordinators to sensitize them to this issue. It was actually based on what Rio mentioned, a case in Serbia in nursing homes, which was devastating and much like what's going on in Western Europe. These deaths we see as not inevitable. What has gone on is not inevitable. And it's tragic, and we have been doing our utmost to make sure that this doesn't happen anymore in our region. And so together, based on that original webinar, we've now been working together with WHO Euro, UNECE, which, as you know, in the Economic Commission for Europe, has a wealth of guidelines on long-term care, on new models of care. And we're working with HelpAge Regional as well on a regional initiative to support country-level action. So there is a lot of work ongoing. We're super pleased with what's happening at global level as well, led by our colleagues who are speaking today, because someone said on the chat, things must be happening at all levels, and at some point they're going to converge. And I think that's what is really happening today. There is a wealth of things happening at country level, many of them led by you who are here on this call. So I don't want it to feel like there's only UN action up here. No, actually there's really a lot of UN action on the ground. It's very much supported by the UN action globally. But we support each other, basically. And we are absolutely with you in terms of needing to scale up our response. And so next week, I'm sure Amal will probably advertise this, so maybe I shouldn't say anything, but you will have received already the invitation for Tuesday's webinar with Dr. Tedros and Dr. Kanem, together with UNDESA and OHCHR. And the focus really is on collective action, how UN can better support civil society in support of member states at country level. So I hope that you'll all join us for that, and we can put that in the chat. And also, Jane, in case you're interested, we would love to host with you one of your webinars focused on UN country action, and we can bring lots of UN country teams together to give examples of how they're working with civil society at country level. So if you'd like to do that, I'd be very happy to offer our support for such a thing. Your leadership is so important to us. Thank you.
I will email you at 8:05. Okay, look, thank you very much. That was really helpful. We're moving to wrap up, but I do want to just provide Joel from Ghana and Margaret from Canada the opportunity for 2 quick questions, and then I'm going to be asking Rio and Amal for your takeaway messages. So, Margaret.
Thank you, Jane. I'm just wondering, and some of you have already brought this up, but what other things can we do as activists in our country, besides just focusing on the convention, to start to move forward on older people's rights? So in particular, I was thinking of, is there ways that we can work more in tandem with the Human Rights Council or other areas? And it sounds like our meeting on Tuesday might deal with some of this, but I think it's really important for us to push out just also past the convention, so that we're keeping the pressure on government constantly.
Okay, thanks, Margaret. And Joel from Ghana? You with us, Joel?
Hello.
Hi, Joel. Yeah, would you like to post?
Yeah, good morning to you all.
Morning.
I think here in Ghana, we have a draft bill for the aged, but this has been on the decks for some time now. Is there any practical action from UN to ensure that at least there's some follow-up on issues concerning the aged in the various member states.
Okay, thank you, Joel. So it's really, what is the process of accountability and follow-up with member states, you know, at the UN and WHO level? Would either of you like to take on those questions? Yep, Amal.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. I was actually suggesting Rio, especially for Margaret's question. I think it's, I think, and Rio have brought this up, the intersectionality is important. So not only to focus on entry points that are traditionally made for older persons, whether it's the Madrid Review and Appraisal, which kickstarts next year, or whether it's the convention. You know, we know that almost, you know, half of persons with disabilities are over 60, and persons with disabilities themselves are growing older. We talk about older women. We talk about there are many, many entry points where older people are still missing that we need to tap into. And civil society have so many milestones the past few months, Jane. I mean, the side event that was held at the High Level Political Forum was a combination of done jointly between the stakeholder group on aging and on persons with disabilities. This was a first, right? So this shows that this collaboration and these silos, you know, are falling apart and people are starting to work together. So I think that's important, because what I see when it comes to member states, when it comes to negotiating ministerial declarations and resolutions, there's a sort of a drop-down list that immediately falls into place. The usual suspects, you know, the children, women, and those groups fought hard to get there over the years. But older persons doesn't come naturally. It just doesn't. Okay, so there's a lot of work to continue there and to make sure not only the advocates of older people speak to it, but also others. I know from delegates that tell me it's hard. It's hard because we get advocates from different groups separately. Why don't these people work together and send a more united, integrated, comprehensive message to us that'll help us negotiate with our colleagues to bring it in? So Rio, passing it on to you.
Yes, with regard to the convention work, you know, the work on the convention doesn't, it's not just those 1 week a year in New York, or even 4 days a year in New York. It happens in every places, and it should. So I think we need to look at, you know, different forums, different existing mechanisms, including Human Rights Council, UPR, treaty bodies, to really push and integrate older persons in the work of these different mechanisms, and that will eventually feed into the work on the conventions, SDGs including.
So as we...
For Joel, please, Jane, just really quickly, I don't want to keep him on time. Joel, you're absolutely right. And we know that a lot of these guidance notes and messages that are coming up, physical distancing, wearing masks, using a hand sanitizer, how does that apply in the context of low income countries, so to speak, or people that live, older people that live within extended families in the household? How do you even do that? And I know that the stakeholder group on aging in Africa has done a survey to collect information from older persons on how the responses from member states have been to them. And I know that they're holding an event coming up soon as well about the context of older persons and COVID-19 in Africa. And this is something that, you know, we should continue to focus on. And to support you guys in your work back in the field. Thank you.
Look, thanks, Amal and Rio. As we wrap up, you know, some of the thoughts that I've had, you've talked about a number of firsts. You know, it's the first time that we've done this, and it's the first time, and it's COVID has really, in my mind, been a bridge, a focus of attention to actually bring different agencies together that may not have actually worked together in such a consistent and sustained way. And that's a first. You know, the first that we really hear the heartfelt need from the Secretary General to accelerate the conversations of member states around a UN convention. So older people, have been very present, in the tragedy of COVID. I think they're also very present in terms of the resilience and courage that older people have all around the world. And I think we've actually really got to get that balance. Civil society has played a prominent role, in driving agendas in a number of different pathways, and that could be at a local level. I just look at Kathleen Brasher and her work in rural areas in Victoria, HelpAge, so all of you are driving agendas at a local, state, national, and so the connection of global to local and local to global is actually happening. But you know me, I'm impatient. I want it to happen now. And I think that's what some of the passion and emotion that I express is about. Can we just do it now? Just stop this. I haven't got time. Can we just do it? So in wrapping up, Amal and Rio, I'd like you to give our audience, our participants of our town hall, some closing remarks. But I would want to ask you, both of you, to respond to the question, how do you keep going? And I say that because we're all exhausted. You're all exhausted. What makes you get up in the morning and have another go at one of those partnerships that doesn't quite gel, or, moving an agenda that doesn't quite want to move? So perhaps if you could, Rio, would you like to just, give us some closing thoughts?
Sure. Interesting that you ask what, keeps me going in the morning. A similar question was asked by my big boss some time ago, and my immediate answer is that, personally, for me, that I'm really feeling part of the United Nations system as a whole. It's not just human rights. It's not just UNFPA, that we are working all together as one. So that's really keep me going personally in my work. And on that note, I think that COVID situation has really forced us to work together. The resources are dwindling in the UN system. Everybody is in a pinch. And I think this, somebody also talked about the time is money and sort of impatience. About this UN strategy, over the last 3 years, at least, when I'm, since I started working on this mandate, we have put forward up and down many ideas to increase the attention of the older persons in the UN system, appointing SG's representative or advisor, etc., but nothing really moved on until that one letter from NGO came to the SG's office. And it's not, it's not me or somebody in OSHR that proposed that we should develop that strategy. It actually came from the Office of the Secretary General. So in that sense, the marching order is already there. And we have already started some conversation towards this end under the interagency working group. Agencies are working much more together. WHO and UNFPA is doing this a series of webinars. So we are very excited to really move forward and accelerate action, and keep counting on the NGOs' support and a push as we move forward. Thank you.
Rio, thanks. And Amal, you're going to take this out, but I want to just remind everybody that next week the town hall is on Thursday, and we have Ricardo Pla Cordero from UNHR, HelpAge International, and the International Federation of Red Cross. So over to you, Amal. You're going to take us out.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. I think 3 things keep me going. The first is, and I don't know if you know, but Amal in Arabic means hope. And I have hope. And I don't always have hope because I'm a realist, but I do see change coming. I see it. I'm almost feeling it. And that's what Rio was talking about. I see that, you know, the door is starting to open, and we just need to go in there, and we need to go in there now fast and strong. So, and I do see change coming, at least within the UN system. And I know to people outside the UN, it's like, meh, big deal, they work with each other, so what? No, it is a big deal to work in such a way. And that brings me to the second thing is, I'm not alone, you know. I have colleagues with me. You guys see me more often than you see them, like Alanna, for example, or my colleague Ritu, or Rachel Snow. But I'm not alone. I've got a team with me. And what's helped us is that we're all already looking in the same direction. And now we're moving together. And this event that Alanna mentioned, and she's one of the key organizers with Ritu, with Rachel on Tuesday, never before have we had two heads of such powerful UN agencies speak together on older persons. And notice that it's collaborated with DESA and with OHCHR. We've broken every single rule and practice at the UN doing that. That's the hope, and that's the, you know, strong commitment and partnership that we have. And I feel I'm accountable. If we don't do our very best at this time, then when are we going to do it? This is it. And having said that, I want to thank you all for the amazing work that you're doing in your communities, at the country level, with us at the UN. It's played such a key role at so many points during the past months. And we've counted on it, and we continue to count on it. So this is not the last you've heard from us. Although I have to say, I will not be speaking at any webinar during August. Part of keeping going is self-care, so we all need a breather at some point. But we're here for you, and we also count on you. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you very much, Amal and Rio.